This video was recorded prior to the grand finals, so I don't know the outcome of that, but when I get back, I'm sure I'll do some cool breakdowns of any cool things we see. But one of the craziest strategies we saw get pulled out in the playoffs was the London Spitfire triple DPS Rushdown comp against the LA Valiant. This one gets Reaper involved in a big way, and I'm going to explain why it works on this map and sort of the evolution of the meta on this map, because pro teams have been playing around with a lot of similar compositions, and this is sort of, I think, the final form of how it works. Now, for this first clip, we're going to focus on the Reaper, but just as well, I think there's a lot to be said about what the Brigitte is doing here, but we'll hold on to that for now. Essentially, what you've got here, when you have Lucio, one tank, and a ton of damage sources, including Brigitte, to be honest, what the Spitfire want to do is catch the LA Valiant in a close range engagement that they can't escape. And having no idea they have a Reaper, they just didn't see this coming. The cool thing about the Reaper and Tracer in this comp is that both of them can play in kind of a flanker style. And I actually think it's really important that the Reaper is selected here because you need something that can blow up the enemy's front line before the Pharah has time to do any work. Because obviously, despite having a soldier here, most of the characters on the team are weak to Pharah, and you don't really have the healing to protect against her range damage. But with this in mind, the next engagement from the London Spitfire uses the other aspect of what makes this comp so good. The objective on City Center is massive. The opponent can't reasonably take any control of it until they go clear you off, so they just hide in the pagoda, bait the enemies in, outside of the line of sight of the Pharah. Widow does get a pick off, but the problem is their comp is so good at front line busting, they're able to burst out of this hole, blasting their Brigitte and shotgun damage really quick. The other cute things about this is City Center as a map has a lot of health packs. So any characters that have speed can go get to them, but also Reaper and Soldier heal themselves, Tracer has recall, so realistically, you don't need a ton of healing to get any of these characters to work. And it's this style of engagement that's really throwing the LA Valiant off. And it's a comp like this, which looks like something that you get in your ranked games and you think is a throw, that actually can destroy enemy teams that are trying to play a more structured style, because this is pure deathmatch mechanics. And the answer, I think, is correct for Valiant. You need more range, and you probably need a third DPS to contain and punish and out-mechanic the enemy. The problem is, if you actually aren't mechanically better than the enemy team, a comp like this, with a lot of greed in it, a lot of characters that could freely get picked off, will simply run you over. It's this type of comp that I think is accurately described as a glass cannon, which is like a RPG MOBA term to describe something that has an incredibly high attack value, but really flimsy defenses that could die really easily. Now, with other examples, we can further explain why this works so well and why it's so hard to play against, but then we have even another example of what the counters actually are. Here's a contenders game where a very similar comp gets run. Granted, it is just with the soldier this time and a triple support, but this is quite different considering Zen Mercy is assumed to be the meta. With the Lucio speed boost, they're allowed to use Brigitte much more like a mini main tank. And I say main tank, not off tank, because realistically, that frontline shield is like a mini Reinhardt, and she's a duelist in her own right. So if you speed that Brigitte up in front, as long as you have reliable damage follow-up, you will just blast any front line that is available for the taking. This is in a way like an evolution of how Goat's comp works, the 3-3 tanky composition. That comp does the same thing, focuses the front line, but it has just tons of health in order to survive, whereas a comp like this instead increases its firepower to do a similar thing, explode onto the front line and offload a lot of damage really quickly. Here's an example of an absolute nightmare engagement that the frontline Brigitte can set up. The enemy's trying to take some space, but as soon as that shield just gets in the way, I mean, this doorway, she might as well just be Reinhardt in the situation. The shield is blocking all of the damage that she needs to block, stuffing up the progression of the enemy, pushing them into this choke to get chewed up by a devastating crossfire. Now, we'll focus on some of the other characters in the comp, but like I said, these comps are quite different to London's. We'll go back to that in a moment. I think there's a really good reason why they take the Reaper, because if we look to London, oddly enough, they counter this exact composition when they played against the LA Gladiators on this map. And why is that? Well, burst kills are the key. Now, granted, we're not all Bird Ring playing at Super Saiyan 4 levels, so realistically, the high level of mechanical cost that it takes for the enemy to outdo this comp probably makes it stable for a lot of other tiers years of play. But if you look carefully of how London's engaging on this, they are doing the absolute key thing to remember when you play against a comp like this. If you're in a situation where your range damage characters have a massive advantage, as long as the rest of your team don't over-engage and play keep away, this comp just gets wrecked. They never can get onto Bird Ring, and as long as London's main forces don't make any big mistakes, Bird Ring will eventually be able to impose a ranged advantage on the gladiators. And this is the key of why you saw London doing their adaptation of this comp, put in the Tracer and the Reaper. Because the problem is a really good team can simply just play around one range character to do all the work for them, as most of them just sort of corral the enemy and keep away from the Brigitte stun. As long as you don't get caught out by that, the focus fire for the enemy can't land. And this is sort of what happens time and time again. This version of the comp, Gladiators, has to play pure poke, but the problem is London's got a better poke comp because they have the Widowmaker and Mercy Zen. As long as they don't get caught out by the speed boost and the frontline burst, they're gonna be fine, which is kind of my problem when teams make comps like this and don't go all in on the strategy. If you look at a character like Diva or Zenyatta and say they're irreplaceable, we could never put another character in that slot, you can't get the most out of some of these strategies if you assume some swaps are just not negotiable. Because let's compare back to now how London adapted this style of play and what it does, the pressure it puts on the enemy Widowmaker, compared to how long Bird Ring had to set up his shots. Because his team could always play keep away, Bird Ring's Widow in the previous clip, though he hit a lot of 6 shots, also had a lot of time in order to hit them, because his team wasn't under immediate pressure by an insane amount of damage just getting bursted down. You see, London aren't targeting the carries of the Valiant. They're targeting everybody else. The Zenyatta, the Winston, the Diva, whomever they can even get their hands on, they're going to fight. And when you play that way, it requires the enemy DPS to step up. But the problem is, realistically, the LA Valiant's comp simply doesn't buy them any time to get anything done. How many rockets did Agilities even get to shoot by the time his whole team was dead? This isn't what you want. When you create a comp like this, it requires the enemy team to come up with the counters really quick. And if they can't figure out the engagement counter or the hero counter fast enough, you're just going to run over them with a strategy like this. With more preparation against this comp, I think Valiant could have looked a bit better. We are sort of seeing the pro meta change up a bit to be more Lucio centered on these King of the Hill type maps because of the strength you have in order to bottle up your opposition. I think the other route you could go is maybe playing something like a bunker comp, Orisa Hog McCree with no Diva to eat the halts. Definitely could see some value bursting down targets. That's what the Valiant needed. They needed to find burst kills on this greedy playstyle immediately because all of their ground forces were just getting overwhelmed by the Reaper Brigitte speed boosting at them. The only way their current comp would have done anything is if somehow the ground forces avoided those fights completely, but how do you do that when you have to take the point, right? You've got to go cap, so you got to go take some space eventually. So as long as the enemy counter-engage into you, at that point, then your DPS have to pop off. But I don't think it's a good idea to have over half of your team be incredibly weak to all this damage coming at them right away. You need to have more answers on your team in order to deal with it. Either your own Lucio speed boost in order to ferry around whatever characters you have, or like I said before, like mass committing to some really reliable abilities that are going to get you picks. My last example of this is from Contenders Korea, which is where we're seeing some of the best Overwatch League level talent grind their way up. And a comp we've seen a few times is this Lucio Brigitte Rushdown style. It's sort of the same thing that we've been discussing with what Reaper does. And the theory behind it stays the same. If you have just more firepower than the enemy does, you can get in and burst down targets before they can respond. It's strong against a lot of comps. MVP Space here tries to pull it out to begin with, and funnily enough, GC Busan Wave replies with their own Lucio Brigitte Doomfist and eventually forces MVP Space to swap, and they're the ones who started this shenanigans, and they ultimately lose the round for it. We've seen Lucio fall out of favor in recent metas, but especially when you can exploit what he can do in order to enable some of these deathmatchy style comps, especially on control maps. I think we're definitely going to see a lot more of this moving forward. Not to mention he's getting a buff as well, and possibly even on some of the other map types where I think he's already gone a bit underutilized, especially when it's hard to get your team into position. Guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe because we upload each and every day. So you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Linked in the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.